March 10th, 1941, Portsmouth, England. The night sky was on fire. Searchlights cut through thick, black smoke as Luftwaffe bombers roared overhead. Heinkel, he, 111 seconds, and Junkers, Jew, 88 seconds, their bellies loaded with death. The wail of air raid sirens mixed with the dull, rhythmic thud of anti-aircraft guns echoing across the Solent. On the ground, the great naval dockyard, the beating heart of Britain's Royal Navy, was already ablaze. Flames licked at the skeletal remains of cranes and dry docks. The ground trembled as another high-explosive bomb struck No. 8 slipway, hurling steel plates skyward like paper scraps. The once proud workshops where artisans had built the backbone of the fleet were now reduced to twisted iron and ash. Inside a reinforced shelter near the quayside, Commander Harold Latham, the dockyard superintendent, stood silently as dust fell from the ceiling. A young ensign burst in, shouting over the noise, "Sir, the power station's gone. Pumps are out, dry docks flooding." Latham's jaw tightened. The dry docks were the lifeblood of the Royal Navy's repair efforts. Without them, destroyers and cruisers crippled by battle damage would rot uselessly at anchor. "Get me the engineers," he ordered. Now, outside, the Luftwaffe continued its merciless assault. Incendiary bombs rained down, setting timber stores ablaze. The heat was unbearable. Men worked with hand pumps and shovels, smothering flames with sandbags. Fire crews from neighboring towns, Fareham, Gosport, even as far as Southampton, raced in under blackout conditions, headlights dimmed, guided only by the orange glow of destruction. By midnight, much of Portsmouth Dockyard lay in ruins. The hammering of bombs subsided, replaced by the eerie crackle of fire and the distant cries of the wounded. Hundreds of civilians were dead. Dozens of ships lay stranded, their repairs halted, their crews helpless. Latham emerged from the bunker as dawn broke over a city of rubble. He surveyed the devastation, the mangled cranes, the shattered dry docks, the molten rail lines. Smoke still poured from what had once been the turbine workshop. Yet, amid the wreckage, his voice was steady. "We rebuild. Now." Within hours, a small army of engineers, sailors, and dock workers assembled among the ruins. They were carpenters, welders, pipe fitters, men and women who had lost their homes the night before but still reported for duty. Their orders were clear: restore the dockyard, however impossible it seemed. The Admiralty demanded results. The destroyer HMS Illustrious required urgent hull repairs after a near-fatal strike in the Mediterranean. Every day lost meant more sailors dying at sea without naval support. The engineers had 48 hours, no more, to bring the yard back to life. And so began one of the most extraordinary feats of wartime engineering the world had ever seen. The first light of dawn revealed the true scale of the task before them. Smoke hung over Portsmouth like a shroud. The twisted silhouettes of cranes leaned precariously against the harbor's edge. Pools of oil burned in slow, silent flames on the water. Yet, amid the destruction, hundreds of men and women moved with purpose. Commander Latham stood on the ruined quay beside Chief Engineer Reginald "Reg" Mallory, a wiry man with oil-streaked hands and the calm eyes of someone who'd seen machinery die and live again. "We'll start with dock number 3, Mallory said, voice hoarse. "She's cracked along the pump line. We can patch it with scrap steel and reroute from the secondary station." Latham nodded. "Do it. I don't care what it takes." The order spread like wildfire. Teams of Royal Engineers arrived from Aldershot by truck, bringing portable pumps, acetylene torches, and whatever equipment could be spared. Civilian volunteers, blacksmiths, apprentices, even fishermen joined in. The clock was already ticking. By noon, the yard was alive again, not with the rhythm of industry, but with the chaos of crisis. Sparks flew as men welded through the morning fog. Crane operators worked blind, lifting tons of steel without guidance. Women from the Auxiliary Territorial Service ran messages through smoke-choked corridors, delivering blueprints and tool lists as shells from a distant gun battery echoed faintly offshore. The Luftwaffe had done its work well: water mains severed, power lines down, cranes twisted beyond repair. But British ingenuity thrived on desperation. When the electric power failed, the engineers commandeered portable generators from a nearby rail depot. When steel plate ran short, they scavenged armor fragments from wrecked destroyers. Every Mallory's crew faced the impossible. The dry dock's pumping system, the heart of the operation, was shattered. Without it, ships couldn't be raised or drained for repairs. "We can't replace it," one technician said, despair creeping into his voice. "The entire mechanism's gone." Mallory wiped the grime from his brow, eyes fixed on the broken machinery. "Then we don't replace it," he said. "We build our own." They set to work fabricating a makeshift pump system using spare parts from destroyed tugboats. The air filled with a deafening hiss of steam and the rhythmic clang of hammers. Night fell, but no one left. Floodlights powered by truck engines bathed the dock in harsh white light. Men worked elbow to elbow, their faces smeared with soot, their eyes hollow but burning with purpose. In the canteen, converted from a shattered storehouse, a few volunteers ladled out tea and hard biscuits. Nobody spoke much. They ate standing up, leaning on broken crates, staring into the dark harbor where warships once gleamed. Then came the sound that changed everything, a deep, mechanical groan, followed by the slow surge of water draining from the dock. The improvised pumps were alive. Steam poured from their joints, but they held. The engineers erupted in cheers that echoed through the ruins. Latham, watching from above, said quietly to Mallory, "You've given the Navy back its heart." Mallory just smiled faintly. "We're not done yet, sir. Not by a long shot." As the second night descended, the fires of destruction gave way to the fires of creation. The dockyard that had burned beneath German bombs was being reborn by British hands, blistered, bandaged, and unbreakable. By dawn on the second day, exhaustion had set in. Many had not slept since the bombing began. Faces were blackened with soot, uniforms stiff with dried salt and sweat. But the sound of the pumps gave everyone a heartbeat to follow a deep, rhythmic pulse echoing through the half-collapsed dry dock. It was the sound of defiance. The tide was their greatest enemy now. Each time the sea swelled against the harbor wall, the fragile patchwork of steel groaned. If the water broke through, all would be lost. Commander Latham moved from team to team, clipboard in hand, encouraging and commanding in equal measure. He knew morale was as vital as metal. At Dock Number 3, the repair teams worked like surgeons. They reinforced walls with riveted beams scavenged from bombed warehouses. Civil engineers from the Ministry of Works brought portable compressors to refill the crumbling air pipelines. The entire operation was improvised and yet, miraculously, coordinated. In one corner of the yard, a group of women from the Women's Voluntary Service shoveled rubble clear of the tram lines, allowing supply carts to move again. Nearby, a naval carpenter named George Hales was welding with one arm. His other was bandaged tight against his side, a reminder of the night before. "You all right, mate?" someone shouted. Hales grinned through the grime. "Aye, still got one hand left to stick it to Hitler." Laughter rolled through the smoke. Tired but genuine. By midday, the sky darkened again, a low hum rising from the south. Lookouts shouted, "Raiders inbound!" Everyone froze. The Luftwaffe was returning. "Take cover!" came the shout, but few obeyed. This time they couldn't stop. If they abandoned their posts, the pumps might fail and the dock would flood again. So the engineers stayed crouched behind steel plates, eyes to the sky as bombs began to fall. The first detonated near the foundry, sending shards of iron raining down. The second struck a coal store, erupting into black dust and flame, and still, the men kept welding. Sparks from their torches mingled with the sparks of falling shrapnel. The Royal Navy's anti-aircraft guns barked in reply, tracers streaking overhead like fiery arrows. Commander Latham ducked behind a sandbag wall, shielding his head. The ground shook violently, then silence. The bombers veered away, chased by the RAF's Hurricanes. Smoke rolled across the water, but the dock still stood. Mallory limped across the yard, one leg cut by flying debris. "Dock pumps are still holding, sir. Pressure stable." Latham exhaled, relief cutting through the tension. "Then we carry on." That night, the second in their 48-hour ordeal, the work continued by torchlight. Blackout curtains hung loosely from shattered windows, flapping in the cold wind. The smell of oil, sweat, and seawater filled every breath. In the machine shop, a young apprentice named Robert Kent tightened the final bolt on a newly installed turbine casing. "That'll do," Mallory said, watching. It's not pretty, but it'll turn. Kent looked up, eyes red from fatigue. Will it hold? Mallory smiled grimly. Long enough to get a destroyer back to sea. That's all that matters. As midnight passed, the tide receded, and for the first time, the dock lay fully drained. Floodlights illuminated the bare hull of the HMS Illustrious, scarred and battered from war. To the men and women of Portsmouth, she was a symbol of everything they were fighting for and everything they refused to lose. The repairs could finally begin. The dawn of the third day brought no rest. Portsmouth still smoldered, the air heavy with the tang of ash and brine. Yet in the heart of the shattered dockyard, the noise had changed. The hiss of steam, the clang of hammers, the rhythmic pounding of rivets, the sounds of life returning to a place that had nearly died. The HMS Illustrious loomed in the drained dock like a wounded giant. Her hull bore jagged scars, the blackened wounds of Stuka bombs from the Mediterranean. Every dent, every crack, told a story of fire and chaos. And now, beneath her shadow, hundreds of engineers swarmed like ants, men on ladders, on scaffolds, in pits of mud cutting, welding, hammering her back into shape. Commander Latham surveyed it all from a temporary platform built of salvaged timber. He hadn't slept in 2 nights, but his mind burned clear. "Keep her steady, lads," he shouted over the din. "She sails again, or we don't sleep at all." "Aye?" Chief Engineer Mallory stood at the hull's base, sparks dancing across his face as he directed a welding team. He'd lost his voice shouting orders, so he used hand signals now. Each gesture carried weight faster, tighter, move. The men obeyed without question. Beside them, civilian welders, dockhands, machinists, even a retired blacksmith who'd returned for one last job, worked shoulder to shoulder with naval crews. Class, rank, and uniform meant nothing here. The war had stripped away all pretense. Everyone was just one thing: necessary. Across the yard, a group of women in boiler suits sorted scrap metal, melting down twisted fragments to recast as rivets and plating. One of them, Annie Wilcox, wiped soot from her face and muttered, "Never thought I'd be forging for the Navy." Another replied, "Well, love, Hitler didn't think we could fight either." The laughter was short but defiant, the kind that carries a nation through hell. Inside a half-destroyed machine shed, engineers worked on a replacement for the ship's fractured rudder housing. They had no blueprint, no precision instruments, just instinct, chalk sketches on the floor, and years of experience. When a measurement was off, they corrected by eye. When a tool broke, they made another. Improvisation wasn't just skill, it was survival. By afternoon, the makeshift pump system was still holding, though dangerously. Mallory's men patched leaks with rags and grease, their boots sinking into oily water. "We're losing pressure again," one shouted. Mallory checked the gauge, which trembled wildly. "She'll hold till dusk," he said. "After that, God help us." And hold it did. As night fell, floodlights flickered to life, powered by fuel scavenged from wrecked lorries. The dockyard gleamed in ghostly light, a cathedral of steel and courage. Every clang of a hammer echoed like a heartbeat through the ruins. Latham climbed down to Mallory's post, voice rough. "We're close, Reg. Another few hours." Mallory nodded wearily. "If the pumps last." Latham stared out at the Illustrious, her hull patched, gleaming faintly. "They'll last. So will we." Outside the harbor, distant artillery rolled like thunder. The war was still raging across Europe, but here, in this battered English city, a quiet victory was unfolding. When the clock struck the 48th hour, a whistle blew. The pumps were shut off. The dock was ready. The gates creaked open, and seawater began to return, rising steadily around the hull of the Illustrious. She floated steady, alive, and seaworthy once more. Tears filled the eyes of men who hadn't slept in 2 days. Mallory leaned against a railing, grease-stained and trembling. "We did it," he murmured. Latham's voice was low but proud. "Portsmouth stands." When dawn came on March 13th, the air was still and gray. Smoke drifted lazily over the Solent, and the faint hum of the returning tide filled the silence where bombs had once fallen. The HMS Illustrious rested proudly in the repaired dock, her wounds sealed, her hull reborn. She would steam again within days, carrying her crew back into the fight that still raged across the world. But for Portsmouth, that morning was more than a military triumph. It was proof living, tangible proof, that even in the darkest hours of war, the British spirit refused to break. Commander Latham walked the length of the dock, boots echoing against wet concrete. Men and women lay sleeping on crates and workbenches, too tired to celebrate, too proud to rest properly. Mallory sat slumped against a bulkhead, still in his overalls, a cold mug of tea in his hand. His eyes were bloodshot, but there was a faint smile on his face, the kind of smile that comes only after doing the impossible. A naval officer approached with a message from the Admiralty. "Commander," he said, handing over the paper, "they want to commend the Dockyard. The First Sea Lord himself sends congratulations." Latham read the brief telegram, folded it quietly, and tucked it into his pocket. Then he looked around at the blackened walls, the broken cranes, the exhausted faces streaked with soot. "Tell London," he said, "it wasn't me. It was them." Word spread quickly. Newspapers would later call it the miracle of Portsmouth. Photographers arrived days later to capture the site, the battered dockyard already humming with life again, the workers too busy to pose. The pictures, grainy and raw, would make their way across the Atlantic, a message to friend and foe alike. Britain endures. For those who had lived it, the miracle wasn't in the steel or the pumps or even the ship that sailed again. It was in the unity. Carpenters beside sailors, women beside soldiers, civilians beside commanders, all bound by the shared conviction that this small island would never yield. Reg Mallory returned to his post the following week, his leg still bandaged. When asked how they managed it, he simply said, "We didn't have time to think we couldn't." In the years that followed, many of those who rebuilt Portsmouth that night would fade into quiet anonymity. Some went back to their homes or what was left of them. Others followed the fleet to new battlefronts. But in every ship that sailed from that harbor thereafter, a piece of their work, their sweat, and their courage went with it. And though the war would bring darker days still, the Blitz, the Atlantic battles, the invasion of Normandy, the story of those 48 hours became a symbol whispered in workshops and barracks alike. If Portsmouth could rise from the ashes, so can we. As the sun broke through the clouds, its light touched the battered cranes and the rippling water below, glinting off the hull of the Illustrious like a medal pinned upon the sea. For a brief, shining moment, in a world engulfed by chaos, a city had done the impossible.